The grand ballroom shimmered that evening under crystal chandeliers. Soft music played in the background while guests in elegant suits and sparkling dresses moved from table to table, laughing and sipping their drinks. It was one of those nights that looked perfect from the outside, graceful, polished, and full of people who loved to be seen. In the corner of the hall stood a grand piano, shining under the golden lights. That piano was her stage tonight. The young woman stood behind the curtains, holding her trembling hands close to her chest. She could feel her heart beating faster with every passing second. This was her biggest performance yet, a charity gala filled with the city's richest and most powerful people. She wasn't famous, not yet. She had played in cafes, small weddings, and music schools. But tonight she had been given a rare chance to perform in front of people who could change her life with just one recommendation. It was everything she had worked for, yet in this moment she was terrified. A soft voice announced her name through the microphone. The crowd turned their heads as she slowly walked to the piano. Her dress was simple but elegant, her steps careful and nervous. Some guests clapped politely as she took her seat. She tried to smile, but her hands were cold. When she placed her fingers on the keys, the hall went quiet. All she could hear was her own heartbeat. She closed her eyes for a brief second, took a deep breath, and began to play. The first few notes came out soft and clear. She could feel the rhythm taking over her mind. But just as she started to relax, it happened. Her left hand slipped. A wrong note echoed through the room. It was small, barely noticeable, but in that silence it sounded painfully loud. She froze for a moment. Her heart skipped a beat. She tried to recover quickly, continuing the piece, but her mind had already begun to panic. Her hand started to shake slightly, and soon another mistake followed. And another. A few people in the audience exchanged awkward looks. Someone coughed softly. Then a man from one of the front tables leaned toward his friends and whispered just loud enough for others to hear, "She's clearly not ready for this." His friends chuckled. The sound pierced through her concentration. Her chest tightened. She tried to block it out, but the laughter grew louder. Someone else added, "Maybe she should stick to weddings." Her eyes burned, but she kept playing. She was desperate to finish, desperate not to cry. Yet her hands, once confident and fluid, now felt stiff and heavy. The song that was supposed to be graceful now sounded broken. By the time she finished, only half the hall clapped, not out of admiration, but out of politeness. The other half looked at her with pity, and a few didn't bother to clap at all. She stood, bowed lightly, and forced a small smile. Her throat ached from holding back tears. She walked off the stage slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. As soon as she reached backstage, she sat down on a small chair in the corner. Her hands were still shaking. She could hear the next performer's laughter from behind the curtain. Somewhere in the hall, people were still whispering about her mistakes. It felt like the walls were closing in. She took a deep breath, but the air felt heavy. In her mind, she replayed the entire performance. Every wrong note, every giggle she heard, every disappointed face she saw. It was unbearable. For a moment, she thought about leaving quietly. She could slip out before the event ended, avoid the stares, and pretend it never happened. It would be easier that way. But as she reached for her coat, her eyes fell on an old bracelet around her wrist. It was silver, worn out from years of use. It had belonged to her mentor, the kind man who had taught her how to play the piano when she was a child. She could still remember his gentle voice from years ago, telling her, "Music isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest. Don't play to impress. Play because you have something to say." Those words echoed in her mind now. She looked at the piano again, the same piano that had just witnessed her embarrassment. A part of her wanted to run from it, but another part of her, a deeper, stronger part, wanted to try again. She realized she didn't want the night to end like this. Not with laughter. Not with pity. She hadn't come all this way to walk away defeated. The rest of the performances went on. Singers, dancers, and violinists took turns on stage. The audience cheered, clapped, and continued their conversations. But behind the curtains she stayed seated, quiet, lost in thought. Her fingers gently brushed over the piano keys, practicing softly as if whispering to the instrument. She wasn't thinking about the audience anymore. She was thinking about the reason she started playing in the first place, how music had always been her escape when life got hard, how it had been her friend when she had no one else. Hours passed. The evening was coming to an end. The host walked up to the microphone to thank everyone for attending. The last round of applause began to fade and waiters started preparing for the final toast. And then she stood up. People backstage looked at her with surprise. "What are you doing?" Someone whispered, but she didn't answer. She walked calmly toward the stage, her heart steady this time. The host noticed her approaching and hesitated. The microphone was still in his hand when she spoke softly. "I'd like to play one more song. Just one." The audience turned toward her, puzzled. Some recognized her as the pianist who had stumbled earlier. A few guests exchanged amused glances, whispering things like, "She's coming back?" And, "Hasn't she had enough embarrassment for one night?" But she didn't hear them. Or maybe she did, and she just didn't care anymore. She sat down at the piano once again, adjusted the stool, and took a long breath. For a moment, there was complete silence. Even the servers paused with trays in hand. Everyone waited, unsure of what would happen next. She placed her fingers gently on the keys, but this time her hands didn't tremble. Her eyes were calm, focused. In that silence, something shifted. She began to play. Not the same piece from before, but something entirely her own. The melody started softly, like a whisper. It was tender, fragile, yet filled with emotion. The first few notes flowed smoothly, painting a picture that words couldn't describe. In those notes, she poured everything she had felt that night, the pain, the humiliation, the loneliness, and the quiet strength that had brought her back. One by one, the whispers faded. The room fell into stillness. The same people who had laughed earlier now watched in silence, their eyes fixed on her hands moving across the keys. She didn't look at them. She didn't need to. Her focus was on the music, the language she understood best. The melody rose and fell like a heartbeat. It spoke of loss and hope, of falling and rising again. The hall, once filled with chatter, now felt sacred, like a place where something real was happening. As she played, memories flashed before her eyes, of long nights practicing in a small apartment, of her mentor's smile, of moments when she almost gave up. Every memory found a place in her song. The lights above her glowed softly, casting a warm light over the piano. She looked like she belonged there, as if she and the instrument were one. When the song finally reached its quiet end, she let the last note linger in the air. It hung there, trembling and pure, before fading into silence. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting out a slow breath. The entire hall was frozen, no claps, no whispers, nothing. Just silence. And in that silence, she finally smiled. A small, genuine smile that came not from victory, but from peace. She had done what she came to do. She had played for herself, for her heart, and for the love of music. And though she didn't know it yet, the next few seconds would change everything. For a few long seconds after she finished playing, the hall remained silent. The soft hum of the chandeliers and the faint sound of the air conditioning were the only noises that filled the air. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. It was as if time itself had paused, caught between the last fading note and the heavy silence that followed. She sat there, her fingers still resting gently on the keys. Her chest rose and fell slowly as she tried to catch her breath. For the first time that night, she didn't feel fear or shame. She just felt calm, like all the noise in her mind had disappeared. Then a sound broke the stillness. It was one person clapping. A single pair of hands, somewhere near the back of the hall. The sound echoed softly, hesitant at first. And then others joined in. Within moments, the hall was filled with thunderous applause. People stood from their seats. The same guests who had laughed at her earlier were now on their feet, clapping with genuine awe. Their faces had changed. No more smirks, no more pity, only respect. The applause grew louder, filling every corner of the grand ballroom. She looked around, unsure how to react. She had dreamed of this kind of moment all her life, but never imagined it would come right after being humiliated. A few guests wiped their eyes quietly, moved by the raw emotion in her music. The host of the event, who had been standing off to the side, came closer with a look of disbelief and admiration. Even the strict-looking music critic, the one who had made a mocking comment earlier, stood up and clapped. He didn't smile, but the way he nodded said everything. The young woman stood slowly from her seat. Her legs felt weak, but her heart felt strong. She bowed deeply, tears glimmering in her eyes, not from sadness but from relief and pride. For a moment she thought about all the nights she had played alone in her tiny apartment, wondering if anyone would ever understand what her music meant to her. Tonight they did. After the applause finally faded, the host walked up to her with a microphone. His voice was gentle, filled with respect now. "That was extraordinary," he said. "Would you mind telling us what you just played?" She hesitated, holding the microphone carefully. Her voice was soft but steady as she said, "It was something I wrote a long time ago. I used to play it when I felt lost." The hall was completely quiet again. She continued, "Music saved me more times than I can count. Tonight, I wanted to remind myself why I started playing, not to impress anyone but to feel something real." Her words struck a chord in everyone present. People nodded silently. Some smiled through their tears. It was one of those moments that no one in the room would ever forget. As she walked off the stage, people reached out to shake her hand and congratulate her. The critic who had laughed earlier approached her slowly. For a second, she thought he might say something cold again, but instead, he simply said, "You reminded me what music is supposed to feel like. Thank you." She smiled politely and nodded, grateful but humble. That night, something inside her changed forever. The laughter and mockery that had once echoed painfully in her mind were gone, replaced by the sound of applause and respect. She realized that sometimes failure can be the doorway to something greater, if you have the courage to try again. After the event ended, several guests came to speak with her. One of them, a woman who owned a small music company, asked for her contact information. Another guest, a well-known event organizer, invited her to perform at his next gathering. It all felt surreal, almost too good to be true. She left the hall late that night, the city lights reflecting softly on the wet streets. The air outside was cool, and for the first time in a long while, she felt free. She looked up at the sky and whispered to herself, "I did it." The next morning, she woke up to a flood of messages on her phone. Someone from the audience had recorded her performance and posted it online. The video was spreading fast. The title read, "The Song That Silenced the Room." Within hours, it had thousands of views. Comments filled the post. People from around the world were writing about how the music touched them, how it made them cry, how it reminded them of their own struggles. Some comments said things like, "This isn't just music, it's emotion." Others wrote, "I could feel her pain and strength in every note." She read each message slowly, her eyes filled with tears. She had spent years doubting herself, believing she wasn't good enough, and now strangers from different countries were writing about how her song gave them hope. News outlets picked up the story next. Articles appeared with headlines like, "Unknown pianist moves audience to tears after being mocked for mistake." People were sharing her story everywhere, not because she was perfect, but because she had been brave enough to rise again after falling. Over the next few weeks, invitations started pouring in. Concert halls, radio shows, and even small community centers wanted her to perform. She accepted some of them, but she stayed humble. Each time she sat at a piano, she remembered that night. The humiliation, the laughter, the courage it took to play again. She knew that without that painful moment, she would have never found her true voice. Months later, she was invited to perform at another big event, the same hall where everything had happened. This time, when she walked in, people recognized her immediately. The host greeted her warmly, saying, "Welcome back. We've all been waiting for you." She smiled and thanked him. The same grand piano stood in the center of the stage, shining under the lights. She touched the keys softly, feeling a wave of memories wash over her. When she sat down to play, she didn't feel nervous. She felt grateful. The audience listened in perfect silence as she began. Her music was stronger now, confident, emotional, and pure. It wasn't just about technique anymore. It was about truth. Every note carried a piece of her journey. When the song ended, the hall once again filled with applause. But this time, she didn't need their approval. She already knew who she was and what she was capable of. After the performance, a little girl approached her with wide eyes. She looked shy but excited. "I watched your video," the girl said softly. "When people laughed at you, I felt sad. But when you played again, I wanted to learn the piano too." The young woman knelt down and smiled at her. "Don't be afraid of mistakes," she said gently. "They don't make you weaker. They make you real." The girl nodded, holding her hand tightly before running back to her parents. As the young pianist watched her go, she realized that her story wasn't just about music anymore. It was about courage, about standing back up when the world expects you to stay down. Later that night, as the hall emptied once again, she stayed behind for a few minutes. The lights were dim, and the sound of her soft footsteps echoed across the marble floor. She sat at the piano one last time and played a quiet tune, not for anyone else, but for herself. It was a melody filled with peace. The kind of song you play when you've finally forgiven yourself for every failure. When she finished, she stood up, smiled at the piano, and whispered, "Thank you." She walked out of the hall feeling lighter than ever. The world outside had changed, but so had she. She was no longer the nervous girl who trembled behind the curtain. She was the woman who had faced humiliation, found her strength, and turned her pain into something beautiful. From that day on, her life became a journey of gratitude, performing not for fame, not for applause, but for the love of music itself. And whenever someone asked her about that night, the one where everyone had laughed, she always smiled and said, "That was the night I found my real song." Because sometimes, the most beautiful music comes from the moments that hurt the most. And sometimes silence isn't an insult. It's the sound of hearts listening.